Today I'm going to show you how to make a basic fermented salsa that's very simple and perfect for beginners who are new to making fermented foods. And why do we want to make fermented salsa? Because it's wonderfully rich in probiotics that are great for gut health, and good gut health means good overall health. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broths, sourdough, ferments, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Now, making fermented salsa couldn't be easier, and you just need a few basic ingredients. First, you're going to need tomatoes. I'm using Italian plum, the Roma tomatoes that I like very much, but any tomatoes you have will work. Then you're going to need 1 onion, 1 to 2 jalapenos. I'm just going to go with 1, but you can certainly use more. And you're going to want the juice of 1 lime. And then, normally you would use cilantro, but I'm not a fan of cilantro, so I like to use flat leaf Italian parsley, but certainly if you like cilantro, you can use that too. Now today we're just going to make a quart-sized jar of the fermented salsa. And so given that I'm using these Italian plums and these are kind of on the small side, I'm thinking that I'm going to probably need about 8 of these. Now, if you have those big beefsteak tomatoes, you're probably only going to need 2. So you got to eyeball it a little. But now my tomatoes are all washed and dried. And as I said, I think I'm going to need about 8. And all I like to do when it comes to making salsa is just to cut the tomato, and I like to take out the stem. And I'll take a picture of this up close so you can see it. All I'm going to do is take out this core part because I don't want that to be in the salsa. But I want to retain all the juice and the seeds. I'm not worried about that at all. Especially with Romas, I don't want to take out too much because I want to retain some of that pulp. So I've removed the stem and the core, but I don't throw this out. I save all these scraps, and I do various things. Sometimes I dehydrate them and pulverize them and make a tomato powder along with the skins. Other times I'll just throw them in the freezer and then throw them into when I'm making a bone broth, all different things like that. So don't waste, don't throw anything out. You know me, I like to use everything. Now I've just quartered each half of the tomato, and now I'm just going to cut it up into dice. And I'm going to put this first dice here into my bowl. And I like using this type of cutting board because if you see, it's got a little bit of raised sides, and it's wonderful for catching all the tomato juice that starts to come out of the tomatoes when you start to cut them up. And I just want to show you, I took this out so you could see, this is about the size chop or dice that you're looking for. And I'll take a picture and overlay it so you can see exactly. But they're really just about 1 inch to 1/2 inch little chopped pieces. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and continue chopping up these tomatoes, and then we'll move on to the rest of the ingredients. Well, I chopped up 9 of my Roma tomatoes, and as I said, you know, they're on the smaller side. If you have larger tomatoes, you would need less than that. And I just want to show you exactly what that measures up to. I was just chopping them and putting them in this bowl, but I put them in a measuring cup, a large measuring cup here, to show you that 9 Romas chopped up, that the tomatoes I was using, come to about 3 cups. So whatever tomato you're using, when it's all chopped up, you're going to want to have about 3 cups. Now, that's not an exact measurement, and this isn't an exact recipe. This is a basic recipe for beginners. So there's some wiggle room here that you have, but about 3 cups of chopped tomatoes will work well and will allow you room in your quart-sized jar, which is 4 cups, for the other ingredients. So I'm going to go ahead and put these tomatoes back into my mixing bowl, and we'll move on to adding in the rest of the ingredients. Now I'm going to chop up 1 onion. It's just a medium-sized onion. This is a yellow onion. And I'm going to get ready to peel it, and I'm going to chop it about the same size that I chopped the tomatoes so that everything's about the same size. And I'm not going to throw away the skin. Just put that aside and save that in your fridge or your freezer because you can use that to add to your next batch of bone broth. So I've got my onion chopped up here, and I'm just going to go ahead and add that right into my chopped tomatoes. Now here I've just got a big bunch of flat leaf Italian parsley, and as I said, you can certainly use cilantro. Now this is too much for just a quart-sized jar's worth, because really all you want is about half of this. The amount you want is, while it's uncut and still on the stalks here, just about what would fit in your handful. And now basically all I'm going to do is start taking these leaves off these stalks. And again, don't throw out your stalks, save those too. You know me, we're not going to waste anything. You can throw those into, when you make bone broth, you can throw them in like at the last 10 minutes right before you take it off the heat. If you're doing it in a slow cooker or on a stock pot in the stove, you don't want to put parsley in and let it soak the whole, or simmer the whole time in your stock pot, because parsley does have oxalates in it. And so it's not something that you want to overdo, because oxalates are a substance in certain greens that if you have a preponderance to form kidney stones, that too much of certain greens can cause problems, and so you don't want to overdo. But this is fine. We're just going to chop this up, and I'll just put these aside after I get the leaves off, and we'll save them for another project. And you'll just want to chop this up nice and fine like this, and I'll overlay a picture so you can see it up close. And whether you're using the flat leaf Italian parsley or the cilantro, just cut it up nice and small like this. Chop it real well, real fine, and then go ahead and add that right into your bowl. Next, you're going to want the juice of 1 lime. Now this is an organic lime, and what I always like to do is add in the zest as well. And this is organic, as I said, and well washed. And I'm just going to zest the skin before I juice it. Now you don't need to add the zest in if you don't want to do that, but I just like the little extra nutrition that it adds, because the zest of citrus is very high in various essential oils, depending on what type of citrus it is. And those carry nice antioxidant properties and anti-inflammatory properties. And so I always like to use up everything that I can, especially when it has good nutrition. Well, I've zested my lime, and now I'm just going to go ahead and cut this in half. And then I'm going to add this juice right into our bowl. Now I've got 2 jalapenos here. So for a quart-sized jar, you can use up to 2 jalapenos, but I'm just going to use 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to seed it and remove the membrane. You can certainly leave in the seeds and the membrane if you want, but I find that that makes it a little too spicy for me. So I'm going to remove the membrane and the seeds and just use the actual pepper. Now before I go ahead and cut this up, I'm going to put on gloves, because this can really burn your hands. So if you're new to working with jalapenos or any little spicy peppers like this, be sure to put on gloves, because they can actually irritate your hands. Now what I'm going to do is simply cut off the stem of the jalapeno, and then I'm going to just cut it right down the middle. And I've got some clean disposable gloves on. Now I'll show you what I'm talking about, and I'll take a picture too, and I'll overlay it so you can see it up close if you're new to working with jalapenos. But there's membrane, and then there are these little white seeds. I'm going to remove all of that. And the reason I'm going to remove the bulk of that is, it's my understanding is that it's actually this membrane, maybe some of the seeds, but actually the membrane where the bulk of the spice lives, so to speak. And yet we'll get a lot of nice flavor from the green part, but by taking out this membrane, we'll lessen the heat a bit. Well, I've got the membrane out of both halves, and now I'm going to slice this up into a very small dice, smaller than the tomatoes and the onions. This way it's well dispersed through the salsa, and no one gets one big bite of jalapeno pepper. Now I diced up this jalapeno very finely, and I'll overlay a picture so you can see exactly how small this is, but it's chopped very fine, diced very finely. And now we'll go ahead and we'll just add this right into our bowl with all the other ingredients. Next, we're going to give all of this a good stir so that everything is evenly incorporated, all mixed together beautifully. And then we'll start packing it into our quart-sized jar. Now this is a wide mouth quart-sized jar, and that's what's best to use when you're doing ferments. And we'll just start loading all of this in to our jar. Now the next thing you want to do as you're loading this in is you'll want to pack this salsa down with some type of tool. This is just like one of those little kraut pounders that are used when you're making fermented vegetables, and you'll just want to go in there with this. If you don't have this, just maybe use your spatula and just do like this, or if you have a small little potato masher, anything like that. It starts to help release the juices and gets everything nicely packed down into the jar as tight as possible, because that's what's going to help the fermentation process, because this type of fermentation is an anaerobic fermentation. You want to keep air, oxygen out of the ferment, so you want everything submerged under liquid. So we'll continue to mash this down, and then we'll add in the rest of our tomatoes, or our tomato mixture, our salsa mixture. Well, I've got everything in this jar, and now I'm just going to continue to push this down to try to make sure that everything is submerged under the liquid. Now the final ingredient, once you've got everything in and you've got it all tamped down and the water has been released from the various vegetables, primarily the tomatoes, the juice, the final ingredient you're going to want to add is salt. And I like to use a Celtic sea salt, and this is the coarse ground. Now, since I'm using the coarse ground, which has got a very large grind to it, and I'll take a picture to show you, this is a tablespoon. So if you use a coarse ground, you're going to need a tablespoon of the sea salt. If you use the fine ground sea salt, you're going to use a half of tablespoon. Now, if you say, oh my gosh, that's a lot of salt, I don't want to use it, trust me, it's not going to taste salty, and it actually helps with the fermentation process. But another option is if you want to use a half of tablespoon of coarse ground or a quarter tablespoon of the fine ground, you would also need to add a quarter cup of some type of whey. And whey is the liquid that comes off some sort of fermented dairy, generally, like from straining yogurt or kefir, so on and so forth. And then you would add that in, and then you could add less salt, because that whey has a lot of good bacteria in it that can kick off the fermentation process. Now, as I've shared with you, if you've seen some of my other fermentation videos, I don't like to use whey. I find that it creates a little bit of a milky flavor, and it's a flavor that I don't find to be compatible with ferments like this or sauerkraut or kimchi, so I prefer just to go with all salt. Now, what you can do the next time around, if this is the first time that you're making this, and I'm showing you how to do this as if this were my first time making ferments, because this is very much for a beginner. After you finish your first batch of ferment, whether it's sauerkraut or kimchi or a salsa like this, save some of the liquid, about a quarter cup of it, and then add that to your next ferment, along with less salt. So that's a way to get away from having to use what you might consider a lot of salt. But trust me, this really helps with the fermentation process, and I do not find it gives it a salty taste. Now I'm going to go ahead and just add the salt in right on the top here. Now, I don't add this into the bowl when we're mixing everything, because I can't guarantee 100% that, because there is some flexibility with this recipe, because we're working with, different sized tomatoes and onions, and it's not an exact science. I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to get everything in that bowl into my fermentation jar. And so I don't want to add the salt in, because then it wouldn't guarantee that I would actually have a total of a tablespoon of coarse sea salt in my quart-sized jar. I may be leaving some behind in that bowl if I'm not able to fit all of the vegetables in here. So you want to add the salt in once you've got everything in your jar, so that each jar has 1 tablespoon of the coarse sea salt. Now I'm just going to take my spatula and just submerge that salt so it gets under the water, and it'll start to dissolve and work its way down through the whole ferment. Sometimes you might see people mixing the salt and the water together, and then having that as an aside to like add in. But again, that I don't feel is exact enough, because as you see, we had absolutely no need to add any water to this particular ferment. And even if we wanted to top it off with a little water, because we do have a little room, we don't know exactly if we would be able to use all of the water with which we mixed the salt with. So I find just mix the salt right into the jar. It'll dissolve just fine. I've never had any trouble with it, and it works beautifully like this. And I know that I'm going to have exactly 1 tablespoon of coarse sea salt per quart-sized jar. Now that we've got everything packed into our jar, we've got a couple of options for how we want to keep everything submerged under the liquid as this goes through the fermentation process. Now, if you have one of these glass weights, you've probably seen these around, they've become more common now with fermentation, with home fermentation becoming more common. If you have one of these glass weights, all you need to do is just drop it down right on top of the ferment, and it'll keep everything submerged. If you don't have one of these, don't worry. Something that I did for years, and actually is really one of my favorite ways to ferment and keep everything submerged under the liquid, is to use one of these 4-ounce jelly jars. This is just a 4-ounce canning jelly jar, and you can just drop this right in, and it'll weight everything down. And don't worry about the liquid spilling over, because what'll happen is the liquid will come up over the edge, and any extra liquid will go right into your little jelly jar. So you can just drop that right down in. Okay, so those are your 2 options. Next, for a lid, you've also got a couple of options. You can go ahead and just use one of these white plastic storage lids. These are specifically made for quart-sized canning jars, not for when you're actually water bath or pressure canning. These are for once you, if you have done water bath canning or you have pressure canned something and you remove the traditional, I'll show you the traditional canning lid, and you open it, and then now it's time to be refrigerated, you use one of these lids. But they also come in very handy for making ferments. And so you can just put this right on, and then you're done. Now, if you decide to use one of these, you have to basically what we call burp this jar every day, because as this starts to ferment, it's going to start to become bubbly and fizzy. And that's the carbon dioxide that's building up, that's given off when all the bacteria starts eating all of the goodies in here. It starts eating the natural sugars that occur in the tomatoes and the onions and so on and so forth. And as the bacteria eats that and produces that CO2, that's what causes everything to become fizzy. And you want to release that so that it doesn't build up so much to the point where it might break your jar. So you'll start to see everything getting very fizzy, and you'll just open it, you'll hear psh like that, and then you can close it again. And you want to limit for how long you keep it open, because you really want to limit any additional oxygen getting in that you really don't want, because oxygen, again, is what causes spoilage. But all of that fizziness and bubbles that you see starting to occur is a good sign that the bacteria is really working hard and eating up all the sugars that naturally occur in there, as I mentioned, and it's creating a very probiotic-rich environment. And that's the wonderful thing about ferments, that they're very high in probiotics. And, you know, we all hear about how good probiotics are, and we need to get enough good probiotics in our body, and they're wonderful for our gut and keeping our gut healthy and strong, and then keeping our bodies overall healthy, because you hear today, you know, gut health is really what seems to rule so much of the things that surround all of our good health. And what's also interesting about probiotics is that when you make a natural ferment like this, I read that just a tablespoon of this, like if you make sauerkraut or kimchi, or in this case a fermented salsa, just a tablespoon of this is so much more rich in probiotics, so that are really alive and strong, than what you might buy from a store that's been sitting on the shelf in a capsule. So this is a lot less expensive than those, and it's probably a lot stronger and much better for us. So that's a nice thing about making homemade ferments. Now another option that you can do after you put in your weight, if you don't have any of these white storage lids, no problem. Another option after you've either chosen to use your jelly jar weight or your glass weight, and now you're ready to put on a lid, you can also just use a traditional canning lid and a ring. And you can just put it on like this, and that's really what I did for years. I would just use the jelly jar and then a traditional canning lid and canning ring. And the reason that I liked this was sometimes, regardless of what lid you use, it can be this one or this one, they can stick a little as the ferment really and the bacteria starts eating up everything and the fizzing starts going on, and this can sometimes stick a little. And what I found is when I would go to burp it, it might be a little hard to loosen. And then when I would loosen it, it would surprise me and go whoop, like that. So what I liked about using the traditional canning lid and canning ring was that if I put the canning lid on and the canning ring, and I loosened it, and I could loosen it, and I heard whoosh, you hear a little bit of the gas coming out, then I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm in good shape, and then I would just tighten the canning ring again. If I loosened the canning ring and I didn't hear anything, I knew that this had formed a nice seal, which can happen. But then, rather than getting any kind of surprise with whoop like that, when I would open this one, I would just use a little can opener, and it would open very easily, would let out the gas, and then I would just put the ring back on and tighten it up. So you've got some options. Now, there's a third option, which is kind of fun and actually very easy because you don't have to burp it every day. You can use one of these, I think they're called pickle pipes, and they're often sold along with these glass weights. And what you do with the pickle pipe, it's just got this little thing right on top here, and in this, you can't see this really with the naked eye, there's a tiny, tiny pinhole. And the manufacturers of these pickle pipes claim that that tiny pinhole is small enough to let out the carbon dioxide, but also small enough to not let in oxygen molecules. So I don't know exactly how it works, but they say that it does. So what you'll need is, if you decide to use one of these pickle pipes, you just put it on top of your canning jar, the one you're making your ferment in. You're going to need a canning ring, and you're going to have to put this canning ring down to hold the pickle pipe in place. And then you can just watch as it's fermenting and bubbling and whatnot. And I've found that when I use these, what'll happen is, I don't know if I can show you because it may not work, but it will be releasing some of the CO2, but I think it releases it, the carbon dioxide, but it releases it very slowly. So sometimes this pickle pipe thing will actually kind of raise up a bit. It's difficult. I can't show you exactly, but if you use this, you'll see what I mean. This will actually become like a little puffy. It's almost like, oh my goodness, there's so much CO2 and this little hole can't let it out fast enough. But in any event, so that's another option. And with this option, you don't have to worry about burping, so to speak, the jar every day. I just want to say that the aroma of this is heavenly. I'm looking forward to when it's ready. Alrighty, now I'm going to use a glass weight, so I'm just going to go ahead and drop this right down on top of my ferment, and then I'm going to put on my pickle pipe, and then I'm going to put on my canning ring, and now this is ready to just put in a nice, warm, undisturbed place in my kitchen. Now, how many days do we leave it like this? Now, most likely, we're going to be making fermented salsas in the warm weather, when we're growing tomatoes and harvesting them in our gardens, or they're at the farmer's market or at the grocery store. They're at their peak freshness, peak in-season time, and that's the time to use these vegetables, when they're at their peak, to make ferments. So it's probably going to just be about 2 days for these to be done and fermented, because they're going to start getting very fizzy, because it's going to be warmer in our kitchens given the time of year that it's spring or summer. So at that point, so the first day after you burp it, you're probably going to hear a good whoosh. And then the second day after you burp it, you'll hear another whoosh. And you're going to be seeing a lot of fizzing and bubbling rising to the top. So after the second day, give it a taste. If you like it and it's reached the level of fermentation that you like, a little bit tangy, a little bit salty, still maybe a little bit crunchy, but you're really looking for that tangy flavor. And if it's reached that point, then it's ready to be refrigerated. If after 2 days you feel that it's not fizzy enough, or it's not reached the tanginess flavor that you wanted, or is maybe a little too crunchy and hasn't softened up enough, whatever the case may be, it's this really personal preference. You can leave it for another day. But most likely in the warmer weather, you're going to be looking at 2 to 3 days versus when you make ferments in the colder months, where it can take sometimes 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 days. So when it's reached the desired level of fermentation that you're happy with, it'll be ready to refrigerate. And there are different opinions on how people like to refrigerate their ferments. The way that I like to do it is to, if I'm using this pickle pipe apparatus, is to remove the canning ring and to remove the pickle pipe and to remove the weight. I'm gonna have to get a little spoon to get that out. So for now, we'll just pretend that the weight is out. Some people like to leave the weight in and keep everything submerged. I don't really find that it's necessary once the fermentation process has started, and having that weight in there makes it a little awkward for people to get the salsa or the sauerkraut, whatever you're making, makes it a little awkward to get out of the jar. So I like to also remove the weight. And then what I like to do is use one of these plastic storage lids and just put the plastic storage lid on and put it in the refrigerator. This makes it easy for everyone in the family, and it's just like something you might buy at the grocery store with a traditional screw top lid, and you can take out how much you want, whatever the case may be, and then you can put your storage lid back on and pop it back in your fridge. I find that to be the easiest. And you can usually find these at your grocery store or any big box store. They're usually sold in the canning section, and they're very commonly available during the summer months when everyone is doing canning. And you'll see it in the canning section. And I'll also put a link below in the description below with a link where you can find it. They're readily available on Amazon. And I just want to give you a little tip about when you go to put this in a warm place in your kitchen to allow it to ferment. Sometimes the liquid, as it ferments and as it's bubbling up, even if you have the lid on securely, sometimes some of the liquid can bubble up and come out and drip out onto your counter. A good way to avoid that is you can certainly put it, on a nice thick dishcloth or something like that, or just in a bowl. So you can just take your quart-sized jar and just put it in a bowl like this. And if by chance any liquid does come out, you can, because sometimes when you're new to this, I'm kind of been doing this for so many years now. I know kind of right where to fill it, and I know the temperature in my kitchen, and I know exactly how many days it's going to take to ferment and how it's going to ferment and so on and so forth. But if you're new to this, and everybody's kitchen is different, and where exactly you fill it might be slightly different than to where I'm filling my jar. Maybe you have a little more or a little less, and it's amazing how just a little bit more, sometimes even just a tablespoon more, and that's difficult to show in film, exactly, because even if I say, okay, put it exactly to this line, another tablespoon, it still might be exactly at that line. But sometimes just that one extra tablespoon and not being able to really show you that difference can make a difference when it actually starts to bubble up and ferment. And if some of the liquid sneaks out, don't worry. If you've got your insurance policy, what I call, just have it in your bowl and it'll just drip down, and it's nothing to worry about, nothing to be alarmed about. You can just loosen it, let out some of the CO2, a little bit of liquid might come out, but you're going to catch it all in this bowl, and it's not going to be a big deal, and it's not going to make a mess. And speaking of the description below, be sure to check that. It's right under this video, and I think it'll say like show more or something like that. And I've got a lot of information in there, and I'll have a link to other videos about fermenting different types of foods. I'll also have a link to a series of videos that I have on mastering the basics of traditional nutrient-dense cooking, and that has all kinds of things, bone broth, sourdough, so on and so forth. And in the description below, I also have a link to my website where if you go over there, you can print out a recipe for this. So that makes it pretty easy if you want to follow along with a printed copy and the video. And if you have any questions about what I've showed you in this video, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and I'll definitely answer them. If you enjoy learning about traditional cooking, be sure to subscribe to my channel, and then click on this video over here where I show you how to make naturally fermented sauerkraut. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.